I sort of saw this guy wearing kind of I think wearing gold jeans or something. I thought he's got to be in the,
and a leopard skin top.
I thought he's got to be in the fine art department. He's definitely not in accounts, because I was I just started. I didn't know where I was supposed to go, and so he was the first person I spoke to at Leeds, funnily enough.
And that was our very first meeting. I think that was a fateful meeting.
It must have been, yeah.
At the time, we had in the studio in the fine art department a little recording studio, which was a little studio for people. It was like the size of a cupboard, really, for people doing sound experimentation, maybe making soundtracks to films, because there was a film department, people making soundtracks to performances, because the art college was very much biased towards doing a lot of performance stuff. There was a big performance area. And I was doing a lot of performance art at the time, so I was making little soundtracks out of loops and things like that. And I became aware of Dave working in there, because he was making some interesting sounds with this strange exotic instrument called a synthesizer. We'd already sort of chatted and been aware of each other beforehand, and we found that we had very similar tastes in music and like the same kind of films, John Waters movies and things like that.
Sort of trashy sort of stuff.
I knew Dave had this synthesizer, and he was writing some songs or making some music, and I think that we both, sort of got together with the hope that Dave could maybe do something for some of the performances that I was doing. And Dave played me a number of little songs that he'd been writing at the time. These
like weird little jingles.
I think I was looking for a way to maybe turn the performances that I was doing, that were quite sort of much more kind of, I suppose, uncommercial, to kind of maybe give them more of a maybe more commercial edge, I think, maybe make them a little more accessible. And I think that meeting Dave and finding these songs that he was writing, and these little 3-minute songs, which were brilliant songs, little songs about consumerism and commercialism and suburban nightmares and strange kind of weird songs. I think I saw there, as I saw in Dave, a kind of outlet to really kind of somebody to do some writing with, to collaborate with, to maybe give something that I was doing a bit more kind of form, a bit more coherence.
We were kind of very multimedia, I suppose, at the time. I mean, we both had kind of like cine cameras and stuff, and I mean, a lot of the art I was doing involved kind of soundtracks, paintings, sculptures, and films. And we just sort of, after we'd worked together on Mark's performances, which we kind of loosely called industrial cabaret, because it's kind of what it was really. But we just sort of focused it a bit more. So it's like, let's just try writing like sort of our version of pop songs, if you like.
Well, I think you're always looking for that more accessible option, I think. Something that you can take your art from the context of art college and kind of make it commercially available, trying to do something commercial with it. And I think that pop music is often or music is often the way to do that.
We used to drink in the same pub when we were students as the Gang of Four and the Delta 5 and Mekons, but particularly the Gang of Four. They were the most political of all these bands.
We were actually being quite political in our own way, yeah. I think. We were writing about modern society and these modern little sort of, consumerist sort of things, making digs at all this sort of consumerism and trash culture. And
we came very much from the sort of punk ideal, really, that instead of like using 3 chords on a guitar, that you'd play like one note on a synthesizer. So it's very much from that kind of total punk background, because we were both into all that scene, and that was all kind of happening when we were at college. We'd go and see bands like The Clash and Joy Division and stuff, and it was very much a big influence on us. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that we both were into, things like Giorgio Moroder and a lot of kind of American sort of electronic disco music. But I mean, for me, the starting point really was, I was really heavily into the Northern Soul thing in like 1975. And that was also the same time when I heard Kraftwerk for the first time. I heard Autobahn, and there were those 2 things stuck in my head. And it kind of, in a way, if I look at it, that was kind of like, that's where the sort of germ of the idea for Soft Cell kind of came from. There was this sort of passion of Northern Soul with this sort of coldness of the sort of machine music of Kraftwerk, and it was like a fusion of those 2 things for me. That was kind of a starting point.
I grew up liking that kind of stuff. I had a very kind of eclectic sort of taste in music, and I always loved those kind of what you probably term as nostalgic singers, or the singers of the 50s and the 40s and the 60s as well. Right through to people like Dusty Springfield and things like that. So it was this strange kind of melting pot of all our influences and ideas that went into making sort of soft cell. I mean, people often said it's kind of, you know, I suppose it's like, you know, Kraftwerk meets Judy Garland or something. I don't know, kind of Leather Sinatra or something, you know.
Our first performance, I think, was at a Christmas party at Leeds Polytechnic, and it was just for the, I think it was just for the fine art department. So we had a kind of friendly crowd that was sympathetic to our ideas, but it was a very kind of terrifying experience. I can remember, like, because I'd never performed live on stage before in front of a band. I think Mark had been in a few bands before, hadn't he? But it was my first time.
Punk bands, best forgotten, I think.
Yes.
If you go to places like Southport and Blackpool, you see very much a lot of these casinos or bars or pubs, or they had little cabaret shows. I mean, they did in Southport, and you'd always get the kind of slightly kind of cheesy, flamboyant singer, and you'd always get the miserable kind of bon tempi player sort of playing,
that was us, really.
Playing in these bars.
That was the prototype.
And it was very much a blueprint. It was like having all this kind of aspirations.
There used to be a drummer there who used to play with one stick, and he used to do the crossword with his other hand, which was resting on the tom-tom. That was, and they used to get these drunk old ladies doing a turn.
Yeah, so that's where I think we really were a really
that's
kind of
the real influence,
influence of that, I think. Yeah.
My mum financed our first record, which I did pay her back eventually. But yeah, she lent me 500 quid, and so we'd had some of the recordings we'd done at the art college. We had 4 tracks that we sent off to be mastered, and then we were sort of hawking the record round ourselves. I can remember coming up to London, actually going like round to Rough Trade and like trying to sell them a box here. So we were really like, you know, really kind of like.
It was literally recorded. It was a bedroom record.
It was totally, yeah. And I think we pressed up 1,000 of them, which all sold, and I think it's since been bootlegged dozens of times and stuff. But we really kind of we started the hard way, I think.
I think we did. I mean, we did have really a whole sets worth of songs, a whole album's worth of songs before recording Non-Stop Erotic Cabaret. We used to do a version of Paranoid as one of our encore numbers. I think we did Black Sabbath's Paranoid, which seems to sort of fit in very well to all the theme of the songs we were doing, which were very much had that suburban paranoid feel, didn't they?
We played at the Leeds Future Armour Festival. We were about the 3rd band on. When was that, 1978 or something? And this guy called Steve-O, who wasn't actually at the show, but he was based in London, and he was like a sort of DJ, and he was playing a lot of the new sort of electronic music, and then sort of asked one of his friends who was at the show, were there any interest in like little electronic bands playing? And he mentioned us, and I think we even got like about a sort of half a sentence in some paper or something saying, oh, they were quite interesting.
Steve-O was very sussed, I think.
He incredible guy.
He really had his kind of, you know, he really saw what was going on. And it was really the antidote to the other side of the happening electronic sort of scene of that time, which was the more kind of sort of Spandau Ballet kind of thing that was also emerging at that time. And this was the more other kind of more, a more underground edge to it and everything. And Steve-O really kind of saw that, and he really captured the initial beginnings of that on that record, the Some Bizarre album.
We ended up having a track on there called A Girl with the Patent Leather Face, and funny enough, I mean that album was a kind of seminal album really, because it had first ever soft cell kind of recording, first Depeche Mode, first Blancmange, first who else? The. I mean, like, so it's like 4 major acts discovered by this 17-year-old kid from Dagenham.
There was a magazine called Sounds at that time, which featured Steve-O's chart, this futurist chart, you know. And people might kind of laugh at it now or whatever, you know, it might seem as sort of a retro-y thing, but at the time, it really was full of kind of really interesting bands. It really was a kind of pointer to different record companies who were starting to take Steve-O seriously and sort of looking at, and maybe this guy's onto something here, maybe who are these bands he's talking about? And you know, Steve-O really was, at the beginning, one of the only people who really understood us and was really interested in us. And I think that was really part of our decision to really go with him on a management thing. People started to really sit up and say, well, maybe we were wrong. And that's when people started to take notice of us, because, you know, really Steve-O brought us to people's attention.
The main thing I remember was it was Steve-O's birthday one day, wasn't it? And he turned up at the studio and he had a bowl of Rice Krispies, but with vodka on them instead of milk. And then was passed out on the pool table for the rest of the day. And that's my most kind of...
And he did vomit on the synthesizers.
Yes, he did. With Tainted Love, I think, you know, the fact that memorabilia had sort of scraped into into the kind of lower reach of the charts. I think it peaked at about 99 or something, didn't it? And we just sort of we had to beg Phonogram. I think Steve-O had to beg Phonogram to kind of let us record another single, and they were very kind of, oh, I don't know about that. We're not really sure, but eventually relented, and we did Tainted Love, and you know, as I said, the rest is history. But it was like we became pop stars kind of overnight, but totally by accident. There was no sort of grand design. There was no, we could never have imagined that, you know, how big that was going to be. You know, so it's a pretty kind of terrifying. I mean, brilliant, but terrifying experience in a lot of ways.
I mean, it was really, because, you know, it really does turn your life upside down. When we first appeared on Top of the Pops, I think we were both still living in what was pretty much a semi-squat, really, for want of a better word, in Leeds. And it was quite, I think, you're trying to sum up those feelings you have when you first sort of hear it's in the charts. It's a strange kind of thing, because it's this kind of, you don't actually believe it's happening to you. You know, it's this strange thing. It's like, it feels like you're outside your own body and it's kind of happening to somebody else, you know, but you're just kind of watching it. And then you feel all these kind of things happen, a multitude of kind of emotions. You feel thrilled and excited that it's happened, but kind of numb and kind of apprehensive as well, because you know nothing's ever going to be the same again. And you think, well, this is something that happens to somebody else, you know, and it's a very kind of weird mixture of emotions when you hear, especially when you hear that you're number one, and especially when it's from a record that nobody ever thought was going to be number one.
I remember going into like a department store with you, and you used to hear this weird word, which was Zim, Zim,
yeah.
Zim, and you'd get all these girls, and suddenly you look around and it was always girls as well. There'd be about
Zim.
20, Zim, look
yeah.
at Zim.
Zim.
There'd be about 20 girls following you around the department store, which is quite unnerving.
It did become very, very frightening to me after a while. I did become put under this microscope and spotlight, and I became very kind of very scared of it all, I think, for a while. And it is the very programme of Top of the Pops that makes the difference. You can be on any other shows, and you know, it's just that show is the show, or was the show at the time, that really made a difference more than anything else. You know, really was, everybody watched it. It was a life-changing. I think anyone who's ever been on Top of the Pops the first time will say their life's changed, because everybody recognised them. And it was that thing. I think you know, half the country, when I sort of went out, half the country want to marry you, the other half want to murder you. I think the differences are our appearances, the way we are on stage, the way we appear. I think that's part of the success in a way. I don't know. It's that sort of.
It was kind of unplanned, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You can't really plan your sort of height difference, but it was something that worked to our advantage. That we never really considered it to be an asset. But people started noticing that. It's like there's a weird sort of tension. There's a weird chemistry there, but there's also this weird tension. I'm very static, and Marc is very energetic, and it's kind of, I don't know what it is. It's the space between us, I think, is what probably makes it exciting.
Suddenly you're there in New York recording your first album, you know, and all these kind of Warholian sort of characters are introducing you to Studio 54 and strange chemicals and strange clubs with people suspended from the ceiling and things. And it just became part of a strange journey and a strange ride that we were on. And I think that was all, the whole sort of drugginess was all part of it. It was to kind of get through it, but also to kind of enhance it and be part of it all as well. I think you said it was like wanting to live that whole Warhol.
Well, it's just, you kind of, you know, you kind of do it. You've got the opportunity to kind of be like Lou Reed or, you know, Johnny Thunders or something, and live out this sort of drugged out kind of off your head
fantasy
kind of existence. And it really is. It is a fantasy, you know. But we were just kind of, we were sort of like acting out being rock stars, I guess.
You know, thinking back on it, I think we were really lucky to have experienced that whole scene and the way that we experienced it. You know, we experienced that scene in the best way that you can possibly experience it.
We probably saw a lot of things that we'd never seen before that we might not have seen in Blackpool and Southport or Leeds. I mean, we got into a lot of the sort of kind of S&M clubs, and because we were very kind of interested in the sort of visual aspect. We didn't really, it wasn't like we were participating in sort of any sexual acts, but it was just a whole visual thing of the sort of not in the Hellfire Club, surely. But yeah, I mean that whole kind of the sort of whole bondage and S&M thing. We just found that imagery really kind of, you know, kind of. Exciting.
It was looking for inspiration as well, looking for things to write
purely,
about and inspiration, yes. For research. I always feel something like that. Last Night in Sodom actually is one of my favourite records. I mean, it's a one. If of the three major albums that we made, I mean, if you don't include the kind of remix one, it's the one that I probably put on most to listen to and enjoy listening to at home. I don't know why. It's just something kind of very raw about it, and something very kind of passionate about it. I think it was us really throwing off the constraints of, the sort of all the commercialism and doing a record that we really wanted to make at that time. And I think it's great that people have cited it. A lot of the industrial scene, especially the American industry, have cited Last Night in Sodom as an influential record.
When we eventually disbanded, I think that we were sort of mentally and physically burned out, I think, and also we were having such horrendous kind of arguments with the record company, and everything was just falling apart. And I think it was the only way that we could save ourselves, really, was to sort of walk away from it.
I think the very name soft sell had become, every time you'd hear the word, it'd make you cringe.
Shivers down the spine.
It just sent you shivers down your spine.
I think we both heaved a sigh of relief, really, At first you think, oh God, this really is it, because we did like the final shows at Hammersmith Palais, and you sort of think, God, is it really over? And stuff. But then after that, it's kind of like, I just remember feeling a big sigh of relief, really, because it was kind of, at least you had a chance to sort of sit and reflect, because all this stuff had just gone by in a blur. You never really had time to sort of assimilate it and what's really going on here, because everything was happening too fast, wasn't it, really?
Too fast, yeah. There was never time to sit back and...
Too much, too young,
Enjoy it,
Yeah.
Well, working together on Tenement Symphony, I think I really wanted to do some writing with David again, because I think I missed that chemistry. I always felt that chemistry was still there intact, and I wanted to see if the chemistry was still there. And I think I'd been listening to some stuff by the Grid, I think, as well, and was thinking things like, I would have liked to write some lyrics to that, and I could have written something to that, and I sort of felt that I sort of missed that. So I think it was a kind of a bit of a sort of a bridge builder, I think, in a way, to do something. And to me, they were songs. I mean, "Hand Over My Heart" is one of my favourite songs. It's one of my very, very favourite songs. And I think that it's a soft, it's very much a soft sell song in a lot of ways. It's very much, it's a sort of a soft sell that should have been a soft sell song in many ways.
We just sort of started loosely writing stuff, not even with the intention of calling it soft sell. It was like, it was possibly going to be, let's write some songs and see if we can farm them out to some other act or other singers. And over this period, about 4 years, wasn't it? I mean, we'd sort of accumulated this material, and you sort of listen to it all back to back, and it's like, it sounds surprisingly like soft sell.